Hey listeners, how are you all? Thank you so much for being our awesome members. There's a lot to come more. Sit tight, be comfy, put your headphones, now let's begin. Meeting for the first time. It was a perfect day and there was not a care in the world. The sun was shining, dreamy misty white blobs drifted lazily across a brilliant blue sky and the various birds were chirping their contentment loudly. Yet for one woman, this day would change her life. Mitarashi Anko, only just having reached the tender age of 18, was strolling merrily down one of the busy streets of Konohagakure no Saito, her home, the place she had almost betrayed, but that was not important now. She had left her depressing thoughts about those events behind her. Although the presence would always be like a looming shadow within her consciousness, they were always squashed down and carelessly flung aside by the boundless energy and spunk that was in her very nature. Almost always anyway. A dazzling grin was plastered on her face, wrinkling her nose, and made her big almond-shaped and dark brown eyes shut tightly despite herself. She didn't need to see to actually see. She was a Junin after all. 2 sets of dango, the sweet and dango type today, were held firmly in her hands. It was her favorite food, but kept slowly disappearing as she ate the sweet dumplings at a rapid pace. Technically speaking, it wasn't food as in something you could live on, though Anko kept denying this fiercely at every possible opportunity. But seeing that she kept eating dango and barely anything else, made several people doubt about the true nutritional value of it. She hadn't died of malnutrition yet after all. As she passed a particularly large crowd of people, she felt he stares of all the males boring near literal holes in her back, and other places. Her grin broadened, if that was even possible. She always laughed about the prim attitudes of all the other women in this village. If you had the goods, why not show them off like they were supposed to be in the first place? This had become her personal motto. A fishnet bodice that stretched halfway down her arms and legs hardly left anything to imagination. Thankfully she had the prudence of mind to cover her waist and the short distance of her thighs with an incredibly petite beige-colored skirt, dappled several small pouches and rings to hook on several weapons of her own choice. Hardened and spit-shined steel armguards and shin guards protected her, and added the necessary punch if someone was unlucky enough to get on her bad side. A contemptuous snort escaped her fulsome lips, as she could feel the glares shot at her by several women, no doubt jealous they couldn't make it look as good as she could. Or they were silently accusing her of being a nymphomaniac. In any case, Anko couldn't really care less. They were probably right with the latter option anyway. A long coat, a slightly darker color than her skirt, with a high mandarin collar, covered her generous bust from view even though she never closed it. The standard issue sandals exposed her bare feet except for the straps that held them fast. The Konoha DIED held her slightly spiky black hair from falling in her eyes, and a simple ribbon swept her longer hair back into a simple bun, thus finishing her ensemble. Ah, this is the life, Anko thought contentedly, throwing away the sticks that were left of her precious dango. The back of her hand swept in a carefree, careless manner across her face, wiping away the remnants of food that still clung stubbornly to her face. People would never be able to accuse her from eating dinner in a dainty manner, and she was quite proud of that fact. Thank you very much. Aving wiped the now dirty back of her hand on her coat. She opened her eyes, her chocolate brown orbs sparkling with mischief. She had already done her mission for the day, an A-rank assassination, nothing special. And was now steadily becoming bored. She needed something to do, anything would do. I could annoy Iruka-kun, she thought with unchecked glee. He's so easy. Her grin, already having died down several moments before, returned in full force. People that milled all around her backed off without even knowing why. All that they did know was that they wanted to get out of here fast. Rubbing her hands together like a megalomaniac about to take over the world, she ran off towards where she thought she would be able to find the kind-hearted Chunin, and bowled over several people, sending even some sailing into the air without stopping to apologize. She stood, panting, bloody and definitely not looking like the little girl she was supposed to be. Only a child, yet she already knew more pain than most would in a lifetime. Uzumaki Naruko, a scorned yet spirited little girl and only 6 years old, was currently in the middle of the toughest fight of her short lifespan. And things were not looking good. Not good at all. It didn't help she was outnumbered 4-1 either. Every part of her body ached, even the roots of her long blonde hair, tied into 2 neat picked ails until they were tugged on mercilessly by the girls of whom she had asked a simple question, "Can I play with you guys?" Well, it had been a simple question. That she had shouted things at them at they would not dare to repeat at home was just a logical response to being turned down and laughed at, wasn't it? With one eye puffy and nearly closed, that left one particularly bright sapphire eye to judge her current situation. Her prized orange jacket and matching baggy pants that always screamed, "Look at me, I'm here, you won't be able to ignore me," had several large rips in them. Ouse stains of dirt and blood darkened the bright orange to a muddy red. She flexed her hands, wincing noticeably as she felt the stinging pain of a fresh bite from one of the girls. Naruko smiled however as she looked at the girl who did that to her. She had certainly come worse off, with a bite to the nose and a set of teeth marks that marred her exposed skin below her horrible purple skirt. She looked ready to cry. The ringleader of that little group glared at Naruko and cracked her knuckles in a very unladylike fashion. "We've told you before, Naruko-kun, we don't want to play with you." "Yeah," one of her lackeys with a particularly heinous pug-like nose shouted. "Why do you always keep trying?" Another, standing next to the girl who was about to cry, looked up and rubbed her cheek, which was still sore from when Naruko had punched her as hard as she could. "We don't want to be seen with a tomboy like you." "Shut up," Naruko screamed. No matter how often this scene unfolded, she always got enraged. Why wouldn't anyone play with her? Why wouldn't anyone even acknowledge her? "I'll kick all of your asses, I won't be ignored." The 4 girls looked shocked for a split second, and Naruko took that chance to viciously bowl into the leader's stomach. They rolled over and over for a few moments, punching, kicking, biting and pulling on each other's hair and looking like 2 street dogs fighting over a tasty-looking bone. Standing slack-jawed at the ferocity of their leader and the blonde girl that always approached them every day without fail, the other girls quickly jumped into the fray. A few minutes later, the leader gave one final vicious punch before rising and staggering off, followed by the 3 girls, every single one of them either nursing a bite, bleeding nose, scrapes or bruises, and left behind a ragged pile of humanity that was left of Uzumaki Naruko. Over an hour after the severe beating, the intense glare of the setting sun looked down upon her small figure, dragging herself up along on hands and knees before standing up ever so shakily. Without so much as a sound escaping her lips, Naruko managed to stay upright, even though she wobbled from side to side dangerously. She clutched the ragged remains of her jacket, which hardly covered her black t-shirt with a prominent swirling symbol on the front and back. Taking the jacket off, she slewing it across her shoulder and wiped her eyes with her arm. She wouldn't cry. She hardly cried at all anymore. Instead, she would keep trying without fail, every single day for the rest of her life if she had to. They wouldn't be able to ignore her forever, would they? A small sigh from the little girl broke the silence of the eerily silent playground she found herself at. She looked around and spotted the thing she was looking for. Ever since she had first used them, Uzumaki Naruko had had a strange affinity for swings. For some reason they made her feel like she was able to fly, and she found the motion of going back and forth strangely soothing. When she seated herself on the only operational swing, the other having one chain broken due to rust and excessive use, she began swinging backwards and then forwards again. Taking a moment to throw her jacket on the ground, she began to steadily increase her momentum by using her small legs. When she picked up enough speed, her mind went blissfully blank as the wind began to sweep through her matted and long blonde hair. Naruko stayed like this for a while longer, until her ears picked up the faint sounds of people coming closer. She perked up, and her eyes widened slightly. Had those girls changed their minds? Would they play with her now? Those hopeful thoughts were shot down quickly however, as the faint sounds were punctuated by loud shouts, and if Naruko wasn't mistaken, they didn't sound too happy. She was proven right quickly, when she saw a large group of people, all carrying an odd and wide variety of items, and were being led by the leader of the small group of girls Naruko had asked if she could play with them. It felt like her insides were being sucked down into nothingness through a large pit in her stomach. When Naruko noticed the individual members of the group. There was the old lady from the marketplace who hit Naruko on the head for no reason at all. There were undoubtedly the parents of the girl, glaring menacingly at Naruko, and if she wasn't mistaken, that woman right there used to be her caretaker. There she is. Naruko heard someone shout, "Let's get her," was the surrounding chorus, and little girl or not, Naruko definitely knew she was in trouble now. She was used to people staring coldly at her, or throwing insults her way, not caring if she listened or not. Some even went so far as to throw various items, ranging from rotten fruit or vegetables to small rocks at her. The size of those rocks though depended on the ones that were readily available. Meaning they could range from the size of a small pebble to the size of her own head. Without waiting for the group to come any closer, Naruko quickly jumped off the swing, picked up her orange jacket and ran for it, without looking back. Where is he? Anko wondered angrily. She had been searching for hours and it was already getting dark, yet she still hadn't found Yumino Iruka, the supposed victim of her torment today. Needless to say, Anko was beginning to feel mighty cranky. Anko had tons of particularly sadistic ideas she wanted to try out. They usually ended with Iruka hanging from one window or another in nothing but his boxer shorts. Or just plain butt naked. Anko sniggered to herself. It wasn't that she hated the man, oh no, she would even go as far as to say she liked him very much. But that wouldn't stop her from taking out her sadistic pleasures on him. If only she was able to find him. But as all things come to an end, her train of thought was brought to a screeching halt when she heard a significant number of people shouting in the distance. That's odd, she muttered. I wonder what's, oof. Anko was interrupted when a blonde and orange blur rammed, quite literally, head first into her abdomen. As expected of a Junin, Anko managed to stay her ground, but due to the sudden impact, the blur halted and dropped onto the ground. Hey, what are you doing? Anko asked rather angrily, surprised to see a little girl rubbing her head forcefully. OWWW. The girl moaned and immediately glared at the older woman. While most people would take this chance and inquire if the other was all right, Anko wasn't most people. Instead, I asked you a question, you little brat. What the hell do you think you're doing, bumping into me like that? Anko shouted furiously, ignoring the fact that the little girl seemed to be beaten up quite severely. The child looked frantically behind her before she fixed the only eye she was able to use properly for now on the raging Anko. Getting even and Greer because the girl still hadn't answered her, she picked her up and shook her like a rag doll. Answer me, damn it, even though the little girl was aware that this very imposing looking woman was by now shouting death threats and of course the always bloody dismemberment and so forth, she couldn't help the fact that she thought the woman was absolutely, positively the coolest person she had ever met. Wow, she managed to utter, her voice strangely distorted due to be shaken so fiercely. Her anger leaving her like a popped balloon, Anko was left spluttering and dropped the girl to the ground. Watching the child stand up again and dusting herself off, Anko took note of her various injuries. Kid, what's your name? The girl looked up and grinned, despite a swollen cheek. Uzumaki Naruko, she answered, and promptly kicked Anko in the shins. Cool person or not, nobody was going to shake her like that and get away with it. But Naruko managed to oversee one thing. Anko wasn't a normal villager, and had shin guards. Steel shin guards. Steel and barely covered feet didn't mix. Moaning for the second time that day, Naruko hopped in place on one foot, desperately rubbing it to make the pain go away. Unable to help herself, Anko burst out into a fit of laughter, clutching her midsection all the while. Ha 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 ha, you idiot, ha 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 ha, rubbing her foo. And now glaring at the Junin at the same time, Naruko uttered several curses. Don't laugh, damn it. Pinking away a small tear from the side of her eyes, Anko recomposed herself. Oh man, what the hell did you do? Did you get run over or something? Naruko had the grace to look slightly embarrassed and fingered her blackened eye as she put her foot back down, wincing as she reached a particular tender spot. No, she began softly. Then what? Anko grinned as she saw the tattered clothing that threatened to fall from the girl's body out of sheer misery. Did you get in a fight? Uncharacteristically shy, Naruko fingered one of her dirtied pigtails with two of her fingers and stared at the ground. Yes, she whispered and then quickly looked up again, an almost defiant look in her eyes. But I made those 4 girls pay. Whoa, she took 4 kids on herself. And judging by those bruises, they were older than her too, Anko thought, amazed. What did they do, pick on you? She inquired further, tucking a few of her rogue strands of hair behind her ears. No, Naruko shouted, surprising even herself. They wouldn't let me play with them. You got in a fight over that? Anko asked, puzzled that a little girl would take on 4 others just for that. Your parents are going to be pissed off at you for that, you know. No, they won't, Naruko added sadly and stared at the ground again, using her foot to make random doodles in the dirt. Anko was about to ask further, but didn't get the chance as a male voice suddenly rang out clearly. I found her. Over here. It was soon followed by a growing hum of angry voices, rising to an intimidating cacophony of insults and jeers. Like a cloud of buzzing bees, a growing group of people carrying items that were undoubtedly supposed to serve as weapons came closer and closer. Anko merely raised a delicate eyebrow and took notice of the fact that the little girl looked as skittish as a frightened rabbit, ready to bolt at the merest hint of trouble. Finally, the mob of people surrounded the Junin and the blonde girl, shaking their pitchforks, torches, and many more items. There was even someone, a rather large man, waving a table leg in what Anko supposed to be a threatening manner. The portly man, who put the strong members of the Akamichi clan to shame, spoke up. Or as Anko thought, it sounded more like a series of high-pitched oinks. You little brat, he said, glowering at Naruko while wringing the sturdy piece of wood in his chubby hands. You went too far this time. This was seconded by a plethora of, that's right. We'll make her pay, and the occasional, you're going to die, demon spawn. That last comment sparked Anko's interest. She already thought the child looked familiar, with the brilliant blue eyes and those strange thing whisker-like scars that ran along her cheeks. She immediately mentally slapped herself. How could I forget? Yondaime-sama was such a hottie. Her subsequent thoughts about the 4th Hokage, and the small amount of drool that escaped from the side of her mouth, were interrupted as she felt something latching on her left leg. Looking down, she saw and heard Naruko clutching her leg fiercely, all the while whimpering as she took in the group of people that obviously didn't have anything good in store for her. Despite herself, Anko's heart melted at the sight. Even her slightly sadistic streak wouldn't allow her to just walk away from all this and leave the already beaten-up little girl to her fate. Naruko looked up in surprise when Anko bent over and patted her softly on the head. Don't worry, Naruko-chan, I won't let these people hurt you, she whispered conspiratorially and gave the blonde girl a cheeky wink before she turned to the angry mob with a maniacal gleam in her eyes. A.N. Hitai 8. Metal forehead protector with the village's symbol on it. Dango. Usually 3 to 4 dumplings put on a stick. There are several kinds, ranging from sweet to slightly nutritional. Guess which one Anko prefers. Update. It has been beta-ed now. Thanks to Princess Tsunade, my source of inspiration. Hey you guys, this was just a short test chapter. I guess it's cliffhanger-ish, but I'm sure you guys can figure out how it's going to end, especially with the preview at the end of this chapter. Oh and no, don't worry, I'm not giving up on DYHM or anything. I just wanted to try something new for a change. It hasn't been beta-ed yet, since this was a spur-of-the-moment thing, so please excuse the errors if they are there, which I'm sure they are. I wanted to release this before I went to bed. I'm pretty sure more details will be added to this soon, so there's probably going to be a revised replacement for this chapter. Thanks to Fenris Lupus for reinvigorating my interest in Anko. She's just too cool. Just a few warnings if I decide to continue this, it all depends on you guys and the support I'll get. It's probably going to be Yuri. As in girls getting together with girls. Only for Naruko though, so I'm not going to turn the whole village gay or anything. The pairing I haven't decided on yet, but those with a keen eye will already know the probable pairing for Anko and Naruko will be paired with either Hinata or Temari. Oh, I do love Temari, don't I? My reasons for Yuri are my own. It is not really meant as an attack at yaoi or anything. So anyway, if you like this, please leave me a review. And if you don't like this, well, don't leave me a review. And one final thing, please for the love of God, don't think I'm going to go marry Sue or whatever, because I'm not. And no one is going to be overpowered either. This is so a female version of Naruto is allowed. Terror duo. Naruko looked up in surprise when Anko bent over and patted her softly on the head. Don't worry Naruko-chan, I won't let these people hurt you, she whispered conspiratorially and gave the blonde girl a cheeky wink before she turned to the angry mob with a maniacal gleam in her eyes. Naruko hung limply in the arms of this very intimidating woman as she nonchalantly carried the child while she strolled through the streets of Konohagakure, paying no attention whatsoever to the stares and gawks of various onlookers. The little girl couldn't believe what had transpired only a few moments ago. The high-pitched squeals of agony that had come from the porcine-like man still rang in her ears, making her jaw clench together almost painfully. She couldn't be completely sure, but she knew that the large piece of wood with which he had threatened her was definitely not supposed to go up the place where Anko jammed it so forcefully. If Naruko hadn't been so scared, she might have felt sorry for the man. After all, that obese man wouldn't be able to sit down properly for a while. The rhythmic motion and the telltale clapping of padded sandals hitting the ground at an increasingly rapid pace were oddly comforting to her shot nerves. Naruko certainly thought that Anko was mildly frightening, but after seeing someone protect her like that, well, she didn't know what to think. All her life she had been forced to do things on her own. Apparently, those people who stomped into her tiny little apartment once a month, slammed a handful of coins on the kitchen table, and stalked out again after shooting her a shilling glare, were supposed to be the caretakers who had been assigned by the third to look after her. But they never took care of her at all. It had been nothing different than being alone all the time. It was still all up to her to scrape the money off the table and make a miserable trip to the grocery shops to buy her food, facing the constant looks of revulsion from the staff. Still herself who had stand on a chair to clean the dishes as best she could, still Naruko who had to puff and pant all the way down the stairs, heaving a washing basket almost bigger than herself to the machine to do her laundry. Blinking slowly, her eyes refocused back to the present, the confused little girl took one glance at the face above her. The woman's brow was contorted in a thoughtful frown, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Bright blue eyes rolled to the side, and in disbelief witnessed the lampposts flash by very quickly. Just how fast was the woman walking? Yawning again, she clutched the coat Anko had wrapped around her more tightly. As the girl's eyelids fluttered shut, she only wondered about how it had been such a terribly long day. "Hey kid," a voice called through murky darkness. It was oddly gentle. Naruko mewed and snuggled closer to the squishy fleshy mass that radiated warmth against her own body. "Hey, wake up," the voice called again in a slightly amused tone, and Naruko felt something prod her several times in the ribs, eliciting a soft giggle from the little girl. "We're here." Naruko let out a languid yawn, but even while being dreadfully tired, the child's curiosity won through. Ever so slowly she sat up, propping herself on her small hands to steady herself. Wobbling slightly still, she carefully opened her eyes. One eye, her right one, still remained half-closed due to the swollen eyelids that still remained from her own fight earlier that day. As Naruko's mind steadily began working at full steam again, she tried to focus and take in her foreign surroundings. Still somewhat groggy and ignoring the creak of several protesting hinges and the clap of a wooden door being shut, Naruko's first thoughts were something along the lines of, "This is just like my own apartment." And indeed it was, except for the fact there were a few differences. A few big differences. Instead of one big window that looked out over the busy streets of Konoha and several apartment complexes like hers was, this apartment consisted of a significant amount of large windows with several small glass plates held firmly in place by strips of metal. Through the windows, Naruko could only see various sorts of shrubbery and trees illuminated by moonlight. The pale beams filtered through, falling on light brown tatami mats which dominated the room which Naruko found herself in. Strangely enough, in the middle of the room was an odd-looking rug patterned with kanji. With all the experience with reading she was taught in Iruka-sensei's classes, she could only make out several of the symbols. Strength, wisdom, intelligence, health and prosperity were most definitely the dominant ones. The kanji were in a various variety of colors that fit perfectly with the brown bordering on dark brown of the rug itself. On the rug that dominated the middle of the room, stood a plain four-legged coffee table littered with scrolls of all sizes, both opened and unopened. Aside from the moon, further light during the evening and night was provided by both small and large candles, all set on top of small wooden stools and on numerous gnarled NKS that dotted the thick and sturdy walls. Aside from the wooden planks, wall scrolls with an assortment of different quotes and rules were nailed to the wall. One saying, "Without victory, there is only death," contained an extra scrawl at the bottom, curtly proclaiming it would be the case without dango as well. After taking in the other furnishing two overly large squashy armchairs laden with an exuberant amount of pillows and the large sofa, she found herself on. A slight flickering of light drew Naruko's attention to a corner of the room. Between two of the large windows stood a plain TV set which was currently switched on and showing a movie of sorts with a strange man wielding a katana as he shouted out some badly synchronized Japanese to his enemies. Snorting, Naruko bounced back, in the same warm and squishy mass she had felt earlier. She turned to the resulting soft sniggering that sounded above her head and immediately fell from the sofa she was sitting on with a strangled yelp. "OWWW, Naruko moaned pitifully as she furiously rubbed the back of her head. "Still the idiot, I see." The same voice that had awoken her resounded with mirth, dulling the sharp edge of the spoken words. Naruko looked up once more and saw the same woman who had saved her from the large group of people who had set out to hurt her. Anko's eyes danced with repressed laughter while her lips were curved in a broad smile as she loomed over the 6-year-old. "Hello." "Hello," Naruko replied hesitantly. The dark-haired Junin decided this wasn't exactly the best way to start out things with. But it would do. And as she looked down at this young child, who was still cradling her head due to her fall, Anko's smile remained in place. And perhaps, it softened, just slightly. "Yeah, it'll do." This certainly was a culture shock for Naruko. To go from not being cared for, to actually have someone who actively looked out for her. It felt completely foreign and strange, but she accepted it all the same. Now, Anko wasn't exactly the gentlest person of the village, but she wouldn't deliberately hurt Naruko. Well, the little girl didn't think so anyway. She had her doubts though when Anko forced her to have a bath and practically dragged her to the bathroom despite all her futile protests. When they entered a small room which was dominated by a large tub and littered with a small sink and several cabinets that held toiletries, towels and so forth, Naruko was still desperately trying to grab hold of anything. Naruko had adamantly refused to go in the rather large wooden tub, the rim of which was way over her head, filled with steaming water and brightly white foam drifting lazily on top of it. When Anko asked her nicely to get in, the girl sniffed the scented water and shook her head fiercely. What followed next would surely constitute as comical to some, but it had been terrifying to the small girl. Without warning, and with the seemingly perpetual wicked grin that graced Anko's features, the dark-haired woman effortlessly picked Naruko up, stripped her of the ragged remains of her clothes and dunked her unceremoniously into the tub. Well, she would have, if Naruko hadn't pushed herself up on the sides of the tub with her hands and her feet. Incensed, Anko proceeded to press ruthlessly on the child's back in an effort to make her give way. But when after 3 minutes she began panting slightly, and Naruko was still not showing any signs of giving up, Anko decided on a new approach. One that was particularly effective and she would certainly use in years to come. With a maniacal giggle, and with madly waggling fingers, she tickled Naruko in the sides until finally, she retracted her hands and feet to fall into the water with a loud splash, with her mouth still open from laughing so hard. A smug look plastered on Anko's face, then straightened up to place her hands on her hips. But it quickly disappeared after a fair few moments. Naruko still hadn't resurfaced. The Junin became slightly worried. Anko hadn't gone through all the trouble of saving the little girl to be killing her herself at home, now had she. Leaning over the side, she peered down into the water, trying to see what the child was doing. And indeed, she did find out. No sooner did her head hover over the water, did Naruko jump up, spraying water all over the Junin. Anko had been effectively soaked completely. Naruko took in the sight gleefully, barely holding back a peal of laughter. Several tense seconds followed, until the older woman brushed her sopping wet mass of hair away that was now plastered over her eyes with forced calm. Naruko's delighted giggles died away slowly. She began to become slightly scared of the lack of response from the dark-haired woman. Anko seemed to notice this, and immediately her cold stare, that usually promised horrendous retribution, softened as she took in the frightened look in those big blue eyes. "Hey," she began softly, slowly stretching out her hand to the small girl. She winced noticeably as Naruko backed off quickly, huddling against one of the sides of the tub, as far away from her as she could. Anko froze. Who am I kidding? Anko thought. Of course she's going to be scared of me. I only just brought her home with me after all. With deliberately slow motions so she wouldn't frighten the girl more, she undressed, allowing her wet clothes to fall on the tiled floor with wet slaps. The dark-haired woman only paused to grab a small towel from a nearby cabinet and used it to cover herself as she made her way over to the girl. Naruko turned shimmering orbs to the Junin, analyzing every movement away and clutched herself with shaking hands. After seeing what the older woman had done to that big group of people, she wasn't going to take any chances. There were plenty of events ingrained into her memory of being hurt after even the simplest of pranks. "Why, you're not going to hurt me, are you?" she asked in a small voice and bit her lip. Anko gave her a gentle smile. "Of course not, Naruko-chan." Slowly she put her first leg into the warm water and let out an audible sigh. "The water feels good, doesn't it?" she asked in an attempt to lighten the mood. Naruko, however, gave her a cramped nod, still not willing to get any closer but unable to stop the other woman from doing so. When Anko had finally seated herself, undid her hair band and let her slightly spiky hair cascade down her shoulders, she sat for a few moments in silence to let the blonde girl adjust to her presence. Not really knowing what was going on, Naruko just remained where she was, stealing furtive glances at Anko as she seemed to be perfectly comfortable. When Anko had moaned and stretched her arms above her head luxuriously, she cracked open one eye after she had closed her eyelids to fully enjoy the water. She was slightly disappointed to see Naruko in her odd position still and decided enough was enough. With swift movements and a loud squeak from the blonde girl, Anko grabbed her, careful to avoid her apparent bruises, and positioned her in front of her, back first. "Now listen," she whispered in Naruko's ear, her grip on the girl's shoulders firm but gentle. "I'm really not going to hurt you. Not now, not ever." The girl seemed to relax ever so slightly after those words, but was still way too tense. With another sigh, Anko let the girl's shoulders go, only to wrap her arms around them a moment later. Her tan was a stark contrast with Naruko's own fair skin. When Naruko felt herself being tightly pressed back into Anko's chest, she let out a watery sniff. "You promise?" Putting her chin on the child's shoulder, Anko nodded. "I promise." Silent tears leaked down Naruko's cheeks, mixing with the water that still ran down her long hair and over her face. Anko felt her shoulders shake slightly but chose not to comment on it, instead she remained silent. A little while later, Anko spoke up again. "Let's get you cleaned up." Okay, Naruko responded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. 6 years later, a young girl woke up with a startling scream, golden spikes of hair cascading over her large blue eyes. Widened in horror, said girl immediately bolted upright, her chest heaving slightly. Sheets decorated with tasteful red swirls dropped from her shoulders as he wearily untangled her hands from the sheets and rested them on top of them. Then suddenly the hands flew to her face, her features contorted in a look of abject terror. A single hoarse whisper escaped her lips. "Uh-oh." 3 seconds later, Naruko. Her bedroom door was nearly ripped viciously from its hinges by the sheer force with which it was thrown open. A woman stood framed in the doorway. Her normally glossy back hair was disheveled, her clothes in disarray, and dark eyes shooting electric sparks. Naruko cowered before the raging entity that was Mitarashi Anko. "Where's my dango?" An incensed Anko screeched, her dark brown eyes wide and livid. A long slender hand suddenly shot up, fingers trembling with rage as she pointed it at the figure on the bed. "You ate it all again, didn't you?" A barely audible squeak managed to get past Naruko's lips as she shook her head fiercely. "Liar!" Anko shouted in unsuppressed fury, and suddenly her hands clenched, and a vein throbbed at her temple. "I'm going to kill you, you little twerp." With every ounce of agility she possessed, and with years of predicting the enraged woman's movements, Naruko hurtled from her bed and onto the shaggy carpet of her bedroom floor as the older woman literally jumped at her with her arms outstretched. Pillows went flying and sounds of tearing fabric filled the air as Anko missed her target and ripped up everything in her path instead. Not pausing to thank whatever god who was looking down on her, Naruko took a few swift somersaults to the doorway and promptly bolted out of her room. She didn't dare look back as she heard an inhuman roar behind her. Oh boy, she had sure botched it up this time. Nobody was allowed to deprive Anko of her carefully cultivated assortment of dango. It was her lifeline, her work of art even. And Naruko just happened to eat it all after the Junin had gone to bed the evening before. It's her own fault for not buying me any ramen, Naruko reasoned logically. Too bad that logic wouldn't save her though. And judging from the stampeding that came ever closer from behind her, she wouldn't have much time to think up a proper excuse either. Out of instinct, Naruko began to weave from room to room, crashing open the doors shoulder first. If 6 years of hectic rampaging through Anko's house didn't make you an expert on where everything was exactly, Naruko didn't know what would. Her weaving became more frantic as the screaming and raving behind her became louder and various objects sailed over her head and past her upper body. Anko ne-chan sure is serious today. The blonde girl grunted as she ducked her head to avoid a particularly large object. Was that a chair? Stand still. A roar resounded close by. Naruko, however, grasped a rather chipped doorframe, its paint and woodwork having slightly decayed over the past few years due to both of their rather rambunctious nature, and spun a sharp 90 degrees straight into another room. The dark-haired female swore loudly as she steamed straight past the door and lost sight of her target, grinning wickedly as she heard a rather nasty thunk of flesh hitting wood. Naruko quickly let her eyes drift through the room. It seemed she had made a slight miscalculation. Well crap, she thought glumly, whereas she thought she had entered a room with several escape options. The blonde girl found herself at a dead end. In their only bathroom of all places. A few years ago she might have wiggled out of the small window in the top left corner. But she had grown. Naruko was still small, but was too big to fit through the window anyway. Looking for a spot to hide, she quickly found one and after taking a deep breath, headed there as quickly as she could. Anko, on the other hand, was enraged. Today she would get back at that kid if it was the last thing she would ever do. How dare she eat my precious dango? She knows it's sacred to me. Rubbing her nose gingerly, for she had slammed face first into a closed door when she ran past the room Naruko had entered. After all, she stalked backwards. A Cheshire grin transformed her face into something truly wicked. She was having some rather malicious thoughts right now. Oh yes, she was. She knew that Naruko had fouled up. She knew that the young girl was trapped. And she knew that now the Time had come for her most righteous revenge. Even the demons of old would shudder at the horrible torture the still young as she so often proclaimed Junin was able to exact on her poor victims. Oh, Naruko-chan, where are you? She called out in an overly sweet tone, tapping her fingers on either side of the doorposts. Somewhere outside, a pack of wolves already started howling. And somewhere inside the bathroom, a blue-eyed little girl started shivering uncontrollably. I know you're in here. There's no use in hiding. Anko continued, unperturbed by the fact she got no reply. I won't hurt you much, she added as an afterthought. Chocolate brown eyes sparkled as they caught a hint of movement at the precipice of her field of vision. It hadn't been much, just a tiny tremor. Anko chuckled throatily as she moved silently from the open door to what appeared to be a laundry basket. It was a simple thing, made out of tastefully entwined reed, and just big enough to hold a certain 12-year-old. A perfect hiding place. Bared teeth glinted dangerously as the basket wobbled ever so slightly. This is too good to be true. Anko wondered in amazement. Oh ho, you're mine. With what could only be described as a feral scream, she pounced on the laundry basket, ripping off the lid at the same time in one fluid motion. Immediately she began groping in the large assortment of clothing, only to find. Where is Ak? Anko let out a yelp of surprise when she felt herself being pushed in the small of her back, inadvertently forced headfirst into the basket she had been searching through in the first place. Behind her, a rather smug-looking Naruko was barely able to stop her from laughing. She was still surprised though about having been able to fool the older Junin. Was this finally the day? The day that the student outpranked the master? Not daring to take any chances, Naruko spun on her heels and wanted to make a beeline straight out of the bathroom. Until, not so fast, someone growled ominously, freezing the girl in her tracks. Eep. Blue eyes grew frightfully large as a rather peeved Anko made her way over to her, a pale blue sock dangling in her black hair. You didn't really think you could get away with what you did you? Was the following dangerous hiss as Anko sat back on her haunches and stared Naruko straight in the eyes. Not even daring to shake her head, the blonde girl stood perfectly still. Maybe she'll think I'm dead, maybe she'll think I'm dead. This was of course hopeful thinking. The older woman might show some animalistic traits every now and again, but mostly she was just slightly sadistic. She loved watching people squirm, and no one other than Naruko knew that better. It had been a good 6 years so far. The blonde girl reckoned. It seemed today really would be her last. But, Naruko mirrored without thinking. I'm going to let you go right now, since you need to be on time. Anko sighed, shaking her head sadly. She really had wanted to get back at Naruko. The young girl couldn't believe her ears. Was she getting off this easily? But, the woman said sharply. Ah, another but. There it was. Don't think you're getting away with this that easily. You owe me, big time. The girl just nodded, elated by the fact she wouldn't get horribly dissembled or something along those lines today. She had no doubt though that Anko would one day collect on her debt. And even though it would probably be something really embarrassing, or painful. Naruko thought with a wince she was still going to grab this opportunity with both hands. Thanks, Nei-chan. Naruko squealed as the dark-haired woman seemed to be a sucker for cute sounds and other things and flung her arms around her neck. Adding a quick peck to the cheek for good measure. Yeah, Anko sighed, trying her best to keep the annoyed look plastered on her face and failing miserably. Tally cursed the twitching corners of her lips. In what seemed to be no time at all, Naruko dashed out of the bathroom, only to return quickly and fully dressed. Anko smirked as she saw the girl's attire. Although she had certainly rubbed off on Naruko's sense of fashion, their sense of style was distinctively different. While Anko didn't care if she flaunted her own body, Naruko was slightly more reserved. However, both of them were, figuratively and quite literally, dressed to kill. Both of them had a different approach on how to achieve a wide range of mobility. Anko had achieved this by covering the majority of her body in netting, only covering up enough with a rather short skirt and a trench coat. It had taken years for Anko to get rid of Naruko's horrible fetish with the color orange, but she had succeeded. At least she didn't seem like a bright road marker to potential enemies anymore. Like her, the girl had adopted to wearing a fishnet bodice, only this one clung high to her neck like a choker yet left her arms bare. Instead of exposing her belly and bust to view, Naruko had also found a simple seamless dress she wore nearly every day. It was pale gray, made out of good durable cloth, and no tears were visible to the naked eye. Because of her smaller frame, the dress didn't hug tightly around her like it was intended for. This sleeveless shift stretched from just above her still developing bosom and to the middle of her thighs, enabled her to move more freely, allowing maximum movement of her slender shoulders and arms. Naruko sometimes still complained about the shortness of the dress, because her netting still peeked out from under it, as her bodice ended just above the knees, and because her shoulders and collarbones were still displayed prominently. Anko had simply whacked her on the head and told her to shut up because she looked fine. Barely noticing the girl finishing drying her medium length and spiky hair and tying the goggles she had Then her on her 10th birthday securely on her forehead as she spat out the remains of toothpaste from her mouth into the sink, Anko only had the chance to see Naruko zoom out of the bathroom. Hey, wait up, Anko said suddenly. What is it? Was the muffled reply. Damn, that girl moves fast. Complaining mentally, the dark-haired Junin stepped into Naruko's room. She bit back a wince as she saw the mess she had made, then focused on Naruko, who was currently fastening her sandals on her feet. What? The girl asked, one of her eyebrows lifting slightly as Anko stared at her silently. Snapping out of her slight daze, the woman smiled warmly. Just have fun today, okay? Yeah, I will. Naruko grinned and nodded, picking up her dark blue jacket. I'm going to get back at Kiba for mooning me yesterday. She laughed, and put a foot on her bedroom's windowsill. Well, see ya. The girl shot back over her shoulder as she jumped out of her window. Sighing and hanging her head slightly, Anko watched the girl go. Though she made a point not to tell Naruko, she was worried. The academy's graduation exams were fast approaching. If only Naruko-chan can make it this year, she mused. Anko was by no means disappointed in Naruko's academic results. Like her, what the girl lacked in book smarts she made up with raw physical energy. Who wanted to know how this and that were named when you could use that particular object to beat your opponent to death? It had always worked for her at least. Moving to the girl's bed and bending down to pick up 2 pillows from the floor, Anko reminisced on her time she had spent with Naruko. She had certainly grown up so fast. Without knowing why, a particular memory suddenly popped up in her mind and made her snigger. The first time Naruko ever went through PMS, oh the horror. The hysterical, and not to mention extremely loud screams still echoed through Anko's mind. That particular morning, Naruko had woken up and something in her bed she had not expected to see. Anko ne-chan, I'm dying. She had a hell of a time trying to explain the proverbial birds and bees to Naruko. It wasn't as if Anko was a prude for not informing her sooner. It was only because she thought the girl wouldn't need that information so soon. Besides, she still got the urge to beat the crap out of any guy coming within a 1-meter radius of the blonde child. It wasn't as if it would have done her any good anyway. Regardless, it had been a slightly embarrassing, if not harrowing, experience. After Naruko had gotten past the first shock and subsequent disgust, she kept nagging Anko about things she would never have asked about before. But still, now she had gained this new knowledge, there was now a slight reserve in whatever Naruko dealt with. And she never looked at boys quite the same way anymore. With a gentle shake of her head, Anko resumed the cleaning of Naruko's room. Maybe she could get a mission from that old geezer today. Lately he had been suspiciously reluctant in giving her some high-rank missions. Ne-chan, Ne-chan. A jubilant exclamation sounded through Anko's house, followed swiftly by he sharp snap of a door being slammed shut. What is it, Naruko-chan? Anko called back, not surprised in the slightest about Naruko's energetic disposition. Skidding to a stop in front of her self-proclaimed older sister, Naruko beamed the brightest smile she could muster. Iso kicked Kiba's ass today. Anko could already imagine the various reactions normal parents would respond with to this message. But the slightly sadistic Junin smirked and ruffled Naruko's hair affectionately. Great job, you sure showed those dog-loving bastards. Naruko pouted and raked her hands through her hair. Not that it did her any good though. Ever since she started keeping it short, well, shorter her natural spikiness was allowed free rein. This resulted in a near untamable mass that despite everything, maintained to still look great. It shone with a brilliance and energy rarely seen and was only matched by the sparkle in her brilliantly blue eyes. Naruko wasn't vain really, but anyone taking her hair aside from Anko would die on the spot, in a particularly gruesome fashion. Waiting for Naruko to rearrange her hair to her own liking, and having it spring back immediately, Anko winked at the girl. I think that deserves a special treat. Really? Naruko exclaimed happily. She sure was a sucker for rewards. Yes, really, Anko affirmed with a nod and tapped her index finger on her chin thoughtfully. What would be a good thing to give you? Anko already knew what she was going to give Naruko. But seeing the little girl bounce impatiently from side to side in front of her was still loads of fun. When she remained silent for a few minutes, Naruko couldn't take it anymore. Ne-chan. Alright, don't get your panties in a twist. Anko laughed, and once again ruffled Naruko's hair and immediately had her hand swatted away before she could do too much damage. I know, she said brightly and clapped her hands together in front of her. Naruko hummed in an effort to hurry her sister up. Ramen. Anko finally shouted and pumped her fists into the air, her eyes closing to a happy crinkle. Naruko nearly face-faulted. Ramen. Her fists coming down. Anko looked concernedly at the slightly put-out blonde girl. What? I thought you loved ramen. Well yeah, Naruko acknowledged. And indeed, it was on the top of her list of favorite foods. But what? The raven-haired Junin prompted her. Poking the tips of her index fingers together, Naruko stared at the floor. I thought, maybe, you could teach me a new jutsu. A jutsu, huh? Anko murmured and saw the blonde girl give an uncharacteristically shy nod. Well, I suppose I could. Naruko's head snapped upwards, her mouth curved upwards in a hopeful smile. Really? But on one condition. Anko warned her and held up a single finger to accentuate her point. What? I'll do anything, Naruko shouted, all inhibitions lost at the prospect of learning a new technique. And spread her arms wide to show how much she was actually willing to do. Anko merely grinned broadly. After I've taught you this, you have to beat that little twerp again with it. Egrin now being mirrored on Naruko's features, the young girl nodded happily. Somewhere in a cluttered room, dog toys and other things strewn across the floor, a certain Inuzuka Kiba, who was nursing his bruises from his earlier fight with a blonde girl, suddenly sneezed twice in succession. Blinking in confusion at the sudden hay fever attack, his face cleared. Ah, must be some pretty girl thinking about me, sniffling happily. He wiped his nose. Maybe even two pretty girls. Akamaru, however, looked up from where he was lying nearby and whined pitifully. While Naruko had been sly, disappointed at not being taught the new technique right after Anko had promised her she would, the older woman had told her she would do it when they both would have more time. But for now, she had sent the blonde girl on a mission. A mission of great importance, and one that was almost completed. What is that brat doing? She's desecrating the Hokage monument. Has anyone called the Anbu? You'll pay for this. Naruko howled with laughter as she heard the roaring crowd from beneath her and heard their cries of outrage as they pointed impotently at the girl as she was, quite literally, defacing the face of one of the past Hokage. Sandaime as a matter of fact. And she was quite proud of having already smeared copious amounts of colorful paint in tasteful swirls and other forms on their faces. With another long swath of her heavy paintbrush and finishing a mustache under the third's rather prominent nose, she craned her neck to look down at the crowd below from the harness she was currently fitted in. It had been slightly dizzying, but Naruko had managed to suspend herself from a rope fastened at the top of the monument. It gave her free access to all of the faces. Perfect for her latest prank. She grinned at the enraged faces of the people on the ground and stuck her pink tongue out at them and giving them the evil eye at the same time. Shut up, you bastards. None of you could do something this horrible, but I can. Because I'm the great Mitarashi Naruko, future Hokage. More screams and roars followed her bold statement, just before one stood out like no other. Naruko, what the hell are you doing during class time? Get down from there, you moron. Ah, that's Iruka-sensei. The girl yelped, and in a great panic she dropped the bucket of paint and the brush she had been holding, which was quickly followed by a rather satisfying yelp of someone getting splattered in paint. Clambering up the rope as fast as she could, Naruko tried to make a quick escape before her teacher would be able to get her. She was sorely disappointed though. As she finally hoisted herself up on the precipice of the Hokage monument, she let out a grunt which was followed by a series of sharp wheezes as she struggled to regain her breath. Naruko. An ominous growl resounded above her, and the girl froze. Ah shit. Naruko cursed before she felt herself being lifted by the back of her jacket. Man, this is embarrassing. Naruko. The same growl, and now the blonde found herself face to face with the only teacher she remotely respected, and maybe, just maybe, slightly feared. Hey. Naruko chuckled nervously as she scratched the back of her head. Nice day today, isn't it, Iruka-sensei? Needless to say, he didn't agree. So, after receiving an earful on how her latest prank was her worst yet, Naruko had disagreed on that particular point, which only served to anger her teacher more. The girl heard her teacher use some rather colorful NGUH as he dragged her to a somewhat familiar place. Some of which she hadn't even heard before, and some she was sure even Anko wouldn't use. And that was saying a lot. Speaking of Anko, Anko-san, Iruka cried out, clamping his hand on Naruko's shoulder, who stood with her arms folded in front of her chest, scowling miserably. A few tense seconds passed before a grinning Anko appeared out of nowhere in front of the two. Naruko involuntarily jumped back, Damn teleportation jutsu, she muttered. Heya, Uruka-kun, Anko said jovially, waving at the kind-hearted teacher. Have you come to play? Blushing heavily, the Chunin shook his head. No, Anko-san, he said gravely. Well, he tried to, but his bluster had died down somewhat at the sight of what was technically his superior. Then what? Oh, hey Naruko-chan, Anko continued innocently, taking notice of the blonde girl who still stood scowling. Is this a field trip or something? But if it is, why did you come to our house? Anko-san, Uruka said exasperatedly, scratching his nose. Well, spill it then. What's going on? Was the impatient reply. Instead of answering right away, Uruka pushed Naruko in front of him and pointed at her. Naruko got herself in a bit of trouble. The dark-haired woman looked down at the girl, giving her a conspicuous wink which Uruka didn't notice and then nodded her head knowingly. Oh, what has the brat done now? She let out in an overly dramatic, long-suffering sigh. Nonplussed, Uruka cleared his throat and patted Naruko's shoulders. I don't know if I can handle her anymore, Anko-san. She did something truly horrible today. She made a mockery of the Hokage monument. Did she now? The Junin replied, trying her best to prevent herself from laughing outright. Yes, this cannot go unpunished, he said fervently. I quite agree, Anko nodded. I mean she can't be allowed to. Huh, you do. Now Uruka was truly confused. Here was possibly the most zealous prankster of the village. And instead of hooting like a madwoman as he expected her to do, she agreed with him. Stepping forward, and placing one of her hands on Uruka's, Anko nodded again. Yes, I do, she said softly and trailed her hand up his arm, over his shoulder and finally placed it on his cheek. Don't worry, I will make very, very sure she is punished accordingly. While this was all going on, Naruko couldn't help but grin. Uruka-sensei is such a sucker for Anko-ne-chan. And she was right. Bells and whistles went off inside Uruka's head warning him of a possible meltdown. If he was anything, he was shy around women. Especially around forward women like Anko. A fact that she exploited eagerly. Though he had previous experience with the woman, most of which was rather unpleasant and made him slightly scared of the imposing Junin, there was something about her that. Now why don't you just leave her with me? I'm sure your class is waiting for your return. Uruka heard her whisper in his ear, halting his train of thought. Yes, he said, his anger leaving him rapidly until he was pretty much devoid of rational thought. I think I'll head back then, and Naruko, don't do it again. Bye, Uruka-sensei. The girl snorted, giving the teacher a mock salute. Something stuck in the back of his fogged brain. His student seemed oddly happy of being left in the care of Anko, but he shrugged it off. He had to make sure someone would clean up the mess Naruko's mess. He wondered, a special field trip for his students sounded good right about now. Uruka never noticed high-five Anko and Naruko exchanged or the laughter behind their hands as they pointed at him. And he most definitely didn't notice the two of them walking around their house to clean up a significant number of empty paint cans. Hey, Hinata-chan, an excited Naruko yelled as she made her way closer to a rather nervous-looking girl with navy blue hair. Hyuga Hinata. She was the hyperactive blonde's best friend. And even if Naruko hadn't said that out loud, Hinata still knew and was deeply grateful. No other girl had seemed to want to get close to her. Partly it had been her own fault, since she had been rather reclusive. But instead of giving up, Naruko kept on talking to her. Telling her about her latest pranks. And asking Hinata about the things she had done. The girl swiveled on, her feet and nearly tripped over in the process. Naruko, thankfully, was close enough to catch her before she would kiss the dirt. Crimson crept its way to Hinata's cheeks. I'm sorry and Naruko-chan, she stammered as an apology. Naruko stared at her curiously. Huh, what are you apologizing for? Oh, and nothing, the blue-haired girl whispered and stared at the ground. Naruko raised an eyebrow. You're weird, Hinata-chan. Quote, Hinata remained silent, deciding the dirt was rather interesting to stare at. That was, until she felt an arm loop its way around her right arm. Come on, you know I was kidding, right? Naruko asked and tugged on Hinata's arm to gain her attention. I don't think you're weird, well, maybe just a little bit. Hinata looked positively ready to cry, which didn't go unnoticed by the blonde girl. But it's a good weird, she added hastily to cover up for her blunder. If why you say so, Hinata amended softly. Why don't we go to class? Oh, right, graduation exams are today. Naruko yelled loudly, which caused Hinata to flinch visibly before she felt another tug on her arm. She turned her head sideways slightly and saw Naruko pump a fist repeatedly in the air. Let's go. Even while feeling slightly embarrassed, Hinata couldn't help but smile just a little bit. 10 minutes later, Hinata and Naruko barged into a rather rowdy-looking classroom with a man. Obviously a teacher, with a long scar across the bridge of his nose and cheekbones and a ponytail, looking forlornly at the children in front of him as he sat behind his desk. Well, actually, it was Naruko who barged in, wordlessly proclaiming that she had arrived. Hinata lagged behind like a silent shadow, trying desperately not to be noticed. Though Hinata's efforts were commendable, they were ultimately futile as Naruko picked that particular moment to shout out their arrival just in case anyone had missed them. Oi, you lazy bums! She shouted loudly and caused every head to turn in their direction. Me and Hinata-chan. Naruko paused here to wrap an arm around the poor girl's shoulders and shake her affectionately. Are gonna leave you guys in the dust. During the painful silence that followed, disbelieving stares framed the majority of the faces in the classroom. Hee, we sure showed them. Didn't we, Hinata-chan? Naruko whispered behind an outstretched hand as she leaned over to the other girl. Hinata, however, was completely mortified. Oh no, she thought frantically and her lower lip started trembling. Why us shouldn't have done that? Why not? Naruko asked while smiling broadly. Before Hinata got a chance to answer though, a duo of angry-looking girls literally stomped through several rows of benches and over to where they were standing, which was still by the door. Naruko, a pink-haired girl with a rather large forehead, growled ominously. The other, a very skinny blonde with angry blue eyes, backed her up. Why are you so loud? You're interrupting our conquest of Sasuke-kun's heart. Sakura-chan, Ino-chan, Hinata started but was cut off by an equally angered Naruko. Shove off, Pinky and Matchstick. What's so great about that moody Uchiha bastard anyway? Naruko shouted, pointing at the person in question who was hunched over his bench, his hands entwined before his face and doing his very best to ignore the whole thing. He's a damn emotionally challenged dimwit. Pinky, Matchstick, yeah, you got a problem with that? Naruko asked, quite proud of herself for coming up with such aptly chosen insults. Yeah, we've got a problem with that. The two girls screeched at the same time and raised their fists at Naruko. And you'll pay for insulting our dear Sasuke-kun. Settle down, Iruka shouted over the tumult in a desperate attempt to flex his authority. Go back to your seats, all of you. Grudgingly and with scowls that promised retribution, Sakura and Ino backed off, and stalked towards their seats. Naruko only grinned, spotted 2 free spots after giving the classroom a brief scan with her bright blue eyes, and dragged a still stammering Hinata along with her. Naruko-chan, she whispered softly, not even trying to resist the other girl. The blonde genin to be merely ignored her. She was too used to Hinata to be surprised about her shy nature. Instead she continued her hold on her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze to let her know it was all right. For the next hour, 5 minutes of which Naruko managed to stay awake for since she had heard it 2 times before, Irik instructed them on their possible future as genin, and quite possibly their future promotions to chunin and junin. He even made a point to tell them about possible career paths, telling them they need not only be fighting for their lives, but could fight against suffering and death as medic nin. Or they could choose the path of administrating personnel to the 3rd Hokage or any Hokage after that for that matter. The list went on, and when Iruka was finally finished gulping down a whole glass of water after talking for so long, Hinata inconspicuously poked Naruko in the side, causing said girl to wake up with a startled yelp. Reassessing her bearings, Naruko looked around until she focused on the demure girl next to her. Thanks, Hinata-chan. Hinata blushed. You're welcome. Oi, what did I say about being so timid last week? The blonde girl told her and wrapped an arm around Hinata's shoulders. Why, you said I should be more assertive, Hinata acquiesced. I did, Naruko questioned, scratching her chin with one finger as a veritable question mark appeared over her head. She couldn't remember using a word like that. Anyway, she exclaimed, "You should be louder." "Like me," she finished by pointing at herself with a beaming smile. "Oh okay." The blue-haired girl agreed, and began fiddling with her fingers just before Naruko clamped her own hands over them. "And no doing weird stuff with your fingers too. If you have to use them to punch somebody's lights out." Naruko laughed. "Or gouge out somebody's eyes," she continued, listing several gruesome ways to use your fingers. Hinata's head threatened to pop off from all the blood that was steadily being pumped to her face. By now, most of the class was looking at them, and even Naruko Who had announced that they would have a slight break before he would announce what the test would be about, gave them an odd look. But for some reason, the most embarrassing for some reason was Naruko still holding her hands. Hinata could not really explain why. "They're really soft," Hinata thought to herself, and then shook her head forcefully, which earned her more stares. "What am I thinking? You could pinch their nipples really, really hard. That would be fun." Naruko was still going strong and showed no signs of stopping until Hinata cleared her throat tactfully. What is it, Hinata-chan?" Naruko asked as she shifted her gaze to the other girl. Hinata merely pointed silently over Naruko's shoulder. The blonde girl shifted on her bench to look at where the Hyuga heiress was pointing and began chuckling nervously. He, Uruka-sensei," she began softly in an effort to calm the teacher. "Naruko," he growled, "thinking up ways to torture people, are you?" No, of course I wouldn't, Uruka-sensei." "Right, Hinata-chan." Naruko protested in mock indignation and turned to her friend for support, to which Hinata nodded dutifully. "Who do you take me for?" "Anko-ne-chan." Those seemed to be the magic words as Uruka suddenly began scanning the classroom nervously. "And no, of course not," he stuttered hastily. He. Naruko grinned and winked at Hinata, who was looking quite puzzled. Unbeknownst to the rest of the village, well, Naruko and Anko liked to think so Uruka did too, but they didn't really care. They had played with him the night before after the whole Hokage monument debacle. Anko had actually, but had told Naruko all about it, every glorious detail to the blonde girl's delight. It seemed that the underpaid Chunin/teacher had gone to the public bathhouse after his plumbing, mysteriously, clogged up. To make matters worse, his clothing had undergone a strange transformation during his refreshing bath. To make a long story short, he had been forced to sneak back to his house, wearing his clothes that had been dyed in a clashing mix of sickly green and girlish pink. Along with these colors, several phrases had been placed on his front and back. Some of them along the lines of, "Uruka-kun is a cutie pie, I bow down to my mistress," and of course some things that just weren't proper to repeat in public. Uruka cleared his throat, forcing away his rather unpleasant memories of this not-so-isolated incident, desperate to move on to a new subject. "Right," he coughed again and shot Naruko, who was leaning backwards, feeling quite content with herself, a nervous glance. "Now, it's time for the exam." "Yes," Naruko exclaimed happily and burst from her seat like a veritable jack-in-the-box. "This time the subject will be Bunshin no Jutsu." Uruka waited for the eventual rowdy response, and wasn't disappointed. Cries of outrage filled his ears only to be punctuated by regular loud thumps. Letting his eyes wander for a moment to locate the source, his eyes fell upon a Naruko, slumped over and banging her forehead on her wooden desk, flanked by a panicky Hinata. Damn, Naruko thought, ignoring everything around her as her confidence crashed like an inbound comet. That's my worst skill. Hinata, who knew that already, stared worriedly at the person she secretly, and not so secretly, admired so much. Don't worry, Naruko-chan. She mentally comforted the other girl. You won't fail this year. Sadly, she would be proven wrong. Some nerve-wracking minutes later, Naruko was finally called into a small side room by Uruka. Flanked by another teacher. If Naruko wasn't mistaken, his name was Mizuki. Or something like that anyway. State your name, Mizuki ordered in a lazy drawl, giving Naruko a peculiar look as she stood before them with her hands on her hips, tugging on her dress impatiently while he shuffled some papers on his desk. Uruka stared at him for a few moments before giving the girl an encouraging smile. The 12-year-old grinned broadly and ran a hand through her spiky hair before she pointed at the two teachers in a threatening manner. Naruko. Mitarashi Naruko. And I'm going to kick all of you bastards' asses. Naruko. Iruka shook his head in disbelief. You just have to make a few clones. You don't have to fight us. Oh. Naruko deadpanned. Well, that's disappointing, she thought glumly. If she was supposed to perform her worst skill, she wanted to do something exciting with it, not just make a fool out of herself. Anytime you're ready, Naruko. Iruka supplied. Right. Naruko gulped and placed her feet at shoulder's width, using her hands to form the necessary ram seal. Unable to take the scrutiny of both teachers, she closed her eyes and concentrated as best as she could. Focus, focus, focus. She kept repeating to herself like a mantra. She looked on from her swing, watching every other classmate being patted on the back, receiving compliments from her family. Damn it, their radiant smiles and those happy twinkles in their eyes. Damn it, why couldn't she be one of them? Why didn't she pass? It's all my fault. Why am I so? She was glad that her big sister wasn't able to make it today. Naruko wouldn't be able to face her. How could she? Anko would probably say it was all right, and say that there was always next year. But the disappointment that would be so apparent in her eyes, those chocolate brown orbs full of warmth would lose just the tiniest amount of their pride. And that more than she could bear. Why am I so weak? She couldn't come home and say she failed. Not again. Looking up, Naruko saw the sympathetic smile Iruka sent her way before he walked away with a short old geezer, whom the girl recognized as Sandaime, the third Hokage. Yet instead of being comforted, Naruko only grew angrier. How dare he fail her? She had tried so hard. It wasn't her fault that Bunshin no Jutsu was her worst skill. It wasn't her fault that they had somehow managed to make it part of the exam 3 damn years in a row. Jumping off the swing, she turned to the tree it was suspended on and punched the thick trunk as hard as she could. Naruko ignored the pain as it shot through her arm. It was nothing compared to the giant blow to her self-esteem. He didn't do it on purpose, you know, a voice said behind her. Startled, Naruko spun around. Mizuki-sensei. He's just a serious person, he continued unperturbed and sat next to her on the ground and settled himself against the tree. Naruko lowered her eyes. But why does he only pick on me? She whispered and kicked the dirt with her foot, sending a cloud of dust into the air before it was swept away. He doesn't. It only seems that way. Mizuki chuckled and leaned forwards. You're quite a handful. Well, it sure seems that way, Naruko retorted, her voice rising slightly to make her anger apparent. Mizuki made a non-committal sound and stayed silent. The blonde girl sighed. I just wish I had graduated. As he heard her disappointment, Mizuki gave her a sideways glance, and said something that perked Naruko's attention. Well then, I'll tell you a special secret. Unveiling the traitors. The blonde girl sighed. I just wish I had graduated. As he heard her disappointment, Mizuki gave her a sideways glance, and said something that perked Naruko's attention. Well then, I'll tell you a special secret. The evening sun, with its dying golden rays, sank slowly beneath the horizon. A lone figure sat atop a roof, knees huddled to her chest. Watching it disappear completely, when darkness had engulfed her village, she stood up and jumped towards her destination. A short distance away, unnoticed by the figure, someone else stood. Watching her disappear with a grim smile. Shit, Naruko swore as she nearly slipped from the slick roof tiles, barely steadying herself by grabbing the tin drainage pipe which was fastened against a rather shabby-looking wall. She peered over the side of the narrow roof, and saw nothing but inky darkness. Naruko gulped, for she knew that instead of falling into a never-ending oblivion, he would have crashed on the hard cobblestones of one of Konoha's many alleyways. It was something she definitely didn't want to experience. Not to mention that Anko would pound her into oblivion for attempting this rather stupid stunt. If she would have survived the fall anyway. Naruko and Anko had done some strange and awe-inspiring things together, but her older sister had always mentioned that where she was going now was strictly off-limits. Why Anko Ne-chan respects that old coot, I'll never know. Naruko sighed and shook her head before making her way towards the center building of Konoha, the hub of all ninja-related activity. The Hokage's tower. Half a dozen of death-defying long-distance jumps and mind-boggling airborne flips and turns later, she reached her destination. As the girl held on tightly to the windowsill of what she guessed was the 4th floor, she looked up. She still had quite a way to go. Her nostrils flaring as she let out a resigned snort, Naruko gathered her chakra in her hands and feet. It had taken Anko years to literally beat the knowledge into the girl's brains before she got the hang of it. Well, that was rather subjective actually, if you called a 25% chance that she would fail miserably and fall flat on her behind getting the hang of it anyway. With a great deal of effort, she maintained a continuous flow of chakra. Gingerly, Naruko placed her hands on either side of the window. She pulled herself up some, testing if she wouldn't plummet to her doom on her first try to get to the top. She smiled in satisfaction, as her hands remained sufficiently stuck to allow herself to move upwards. Naruko still remembered Anko's lecture on the amount of chakra she was supposed to use. Naruko-chan, just think of chakra like it's bubblegum. Bubblegum? A much smaller Naruko questioned doubtfully. Yeah, a small wad won't stick to the wall. The woman nodded sagely, apparently pleased with herself for coming up with such an exquisite metaphor. And it won't support your weight. Too much will make you drop like a ton of bricks. The muscles in her arms and shoulders straining to accommodate her weight, the BL-owned girl lifted herself off of the window sill. She then placed her sandal-clad feet on the wall, heart jumping up to her throat when she slid a few inches down the gritty brick walls. She boosted the amount of chakra slightly and then sighed in relief. Oh man, that was close. She increased her efforts, and soon she was clambering up the side of the tower, occasionally sliding to the side to avoid a window. Naruko figured she must have looked really stupid, clambering like some hunched-over frog, making its way awkwardly to the top of the building. But after almost half an hour, Naruko halted at the correct window she had been instructed to enter. She paused for a few moments, allowing her breathing to a somewhat more regular pace. When she had sufficiently recuperated, scrutinizing blue eyes scanned the edges of the window for any visible traps. Finding none, the girl opened it carefully. With all the grace she possessed, Naruko hopped through the opened window and crouched in the semi-darkness of a long hallway. Shifting her gaze to the left and then to the right, she tried to see if anyone had noticed her entry. After no one had burst through any of the wooden doors that lined the hallway, Naruko breathed a sigh of relief. Damn, where is it? Whispering furiously to herself, Naruko rummaged through a massive open cabinet that dominated one of the walls of the room, where the object she was looking for was located. Throwing a bundle of scrolls, rather important ones too, if the official seals from various cages were any indication, over her shoulder, the girl let out a whoop. Found you. Buried beneath another few scrolls, was the scroll of forbidden seals, the cherished treasure of Konohagakure. Shakily, Naruko extracted it and balanced it with both hands. The thing was huge. It easily reached to her chest, and she nearly dropped it as a voice suddenly called out behind her. What are you doing here? Arg. Jumping to her feet, Naruko turned towards the voice. It was none other than the Hokage himself, his balding head visible due to the lack of headwear. There was no other choice. It was time to use the jutsu she had developed in supreme secrecy. Not even Anko knew about it. Hands rapidly formed several seals, and the girl smiled at the old man before she unleashed her technique. Oroku no Jutsu, Sexy no Jutsu. Suddenly, the young girl wasn't quite so young anymore. Standing a fair bit taller, and in a somewhat enticing posture, was a perfectly nude, older version of Naruko. This time with 2 thigh-length pigtails, and curvature that some women would kill for. While a dispersing cloud of smoke that had erupted during the transformation died down to a few slender tendrils that covered her most personal areas, she shot the man a wink and giggled innocently. And that was it. Like a dual hose, blood burst forth from the old man's nostrils as he surveyed the sight before him, not pausing to smirk in satisfaction at the massive nosebleed she had caused. Naruko dispersed the illusion, and left the old man twitching on the dusty floor as she dashed out of the room to the window she had used to enter the tower in the first place. Let's see, what's the first technique? Naruko whispered to herself, sitting on the forest floor and balancing the large scroll on her lap. What the hell? She cried out, thoroughly annoyed. Cage Bunshin. Aw man, that blows. It had taken quite some time, but she had finally reached the rendezvous point she and Mizuki had agreed to. She had been instructed to take the scroll of forbidden jutsu, If she did that, she would pass and become a full-fledged genin. This had better be worth it. It was nearly 4 hours later that anyone found her. But it wasn't Mizuki. Naruko. There was only one person who could make her name sound so scary aside from her older sister. Tired and slightly beaten up, the girl looked up from the ground, only to spot her teacher L. Ooming dangerously over her hunched-over form, murderous intent radiating from his eyes. "Iruka-sensei, what are you doing here?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. Baka. Without warning, Iruka had planted his fist on top of Naruko's head. "You've played horribly pranks before, but this is certainly your worst." Ow. Rubbing her head, the blonde girl stared at her teacher, not understanding at all. "What are you saying? I was told to come here. I've been practicing this new technique the whole time." "What?" Iruka's glare died down to a confused look and his shoulders slumped slightly. "Is that why she's so roughed up? Has she really been practicing a new technique?" Upon closer inspection, it was revealed that Naruko indeed looked worse for wear. Her shift and jacket were dirtied and considerably rumpled. Her skin, visible skin anyway, was mottled with cuts and bruises. All were clear indication of continuous exercise in a place like this. "But, Mizuki-sensei told me to get that scroll, and if I learned this technique and show it to you, I would pass for sure." Beaming, the girl sent her teacher a thumbs up. "Mizuki." Slowly, Iruka was putting one and one together, but not before. "Look out." Without warning, he shoved Naruko to the side and was sent flying against a tree as a hail of shuriken and kunai made its way towards them. Ow. Grunting, the academy teacher found himself nailed to the trunk of the tree, his shoulder, right thigh and his clothing impaled by deadly steel. "Hey, what a shame, I was hoping that would have killed the both of you." A voice, frighteningly cold, rang out through the darkness. A figure jumped out from the crown of a nearby tree and crouched on the ground before lifting itself to its full height. Calmly, the figure made its W.I. towards a bewildered Naruko and Iruka. "Mizuki," Iruka growled, ripping out the kunai from his shoulder. "So it was you." Hee hee. Chuckling maliciously, the colleague of the kind-hearted teacher stepped closer. A stray ray of moonlight illuminated his face, twisted into a sneer instead of the normal friendly visage he normally donned. What's going on?" Naruko was trying to figure out what was happening. Why are Mizuki-sensei and Iruka-sensei fighting? "Naruko, don't give him the scroll even if you die," Iruka shouted frantically, ripping out another kunai, this one embedded in his thigh. "Hey, what's going on?" Iruka coughed, flecks of blood leaving his mouth. "That is a dangerous scroll. It has forbidden ninjutsu sealed within it. Mizuki used you, in order to get his hands on it." "Naruko-chan," Mizuki interrupted him, sarcastically adding the familiarity to her name. "There's really no point in you having it. I'll tell you the truth." "No, don't." The scarred Chun continued to pull out various kunai and shuriken from the tree trunk, desperately trying to stop his colleague from revealing something that had been kept secret for over 12 years. Naruko's eyes widened slightly, while she picked herself up from the forest floor. "What are you talking about?" Smirking, Mizuki stalked ever closer, grabbing one of the large shuriken strapped to his back. "Why, oh, you know about the demon fox being sealed, right? 12 years ago. Since that incident, a new rule was created for this village." "A new rule?" The girl piped up, her curiosity getting the best of her. "But, Naruko, this rule was never meant to be told to you." "Not me." "Why not?" she demanded. Mizuki let out a dark chuckle, while Naruko kept pouring questions. "What kind of rule is it?" Staring deeply into Naruko's sky-blue eyes, the traitor revealed the secret. "The rule is that nobody is talk about the fact that you are the demon fox." "Stop it," Iruka roared impotently, struggling against his remaining bonds. Not letting up, and ignoring the girl's fallen face, Mizuki continued. "Iruka probably hates you, because you're the demon that killed his parents, and now," he pulled back his arm. Like a coiled spring, and with a thunderous roar, the traitor let the large shuriken fly. "I'm going to kill you, you little bitch." The four-pointed star ate up the distance quickly as it whizzed through the air. But before it hit, a blood-matted mass forced her to the ground. Iruka let out a shuddering moan as the weapon pierced his already wounded shoulder. Eyes wide, Naruko watched him in disbelief. What are you doing? Run! Get back to the village. Iruka groaned in pain as he reached back and yanked out the large shuriken, blood quickly squirting out of the newly formed gap. Get help. Why did you? Despite their predicament, Iruka still managed to smile at the blonde as he shielded her with his body. I never hated you, because you have truly become of my most precious students. With that, Iruka let out a soft sigh, and slumped over, unconscious. Lower lip trembling, Naruko balled her hands into fists. You moron. I knew that. Her fists uselessly thumped against his chest before they grasped the Chunin's vest tightly. But, thank you. Loud laughter interrupted them. Ah, isn't that so cute? Did he get himself hurt trying to save you, little demon? Shut up. Naruko's low growl resounded clearly through the night. Or what? Mizuki responded, unclasping the second, and last, of the oversized shuriken and looping his fingers through the center hole. I'll repay the pain you inflicted on Iruka-sensei 1,000 times. Extracting herself from under Iruka's dead weight, the girl clutched him carefully and tenderly laid him on the ground. Her blue eyes flashed coldly like chips of ice as she fixed a steely glare on the cocky older man. Unnerved somewhat by the intensity of her gaze, Mizuki quickly hid it under a vicious sneer. Big words. For such a small girl. Naruko was unfazed by his statement. Liquid fire coursed through her veins, boiling the placid pool of emotions in her heart to a churning mass of fury. Most unnoticed was the heavy presence in the back of her mind, whispering encouragements. He had hurt someone she held dear. He had to suffer. With great difficulty, she contained that rage, that burning emotion. Ever so carefully she balled it up, wanting to save it for later use. If she was going to have to win this fight, she could not allow herself to become a loose cannon. Naruko raised her hands in front of her, her fingers resting in an unfamiliar seal, a simple cross with both index and middle finger. But the power that lay behind such a simple seal would astound even her, and everyone who would dare underestimate her in the future. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, she bellowed, yet purposely holding back on the amount of energy she poured into the technique. Immediately a multitude of explosions and small pops burst forth from all around her. Hazy clouds of smoke surrounded tangible mass, slowly drifting away. If Iruka had been hoping for reinforcements, he would have never predicted this. Where once Naruko stood alone, next to an unconscious Iruka, were now 5. How is this possible? Mizuki questioned in his mind. She never managed the normal Bunshin no Jutsu. Apparently his confusion was apparent on his face as the Naruko who stood in the middle, surrounded by 4 copies of herself, spoke up. I've been practicing hard, Mizuki-sensei. Silence stretched for a few seconds, until yet again, the silver-haired man let the last of his large weapons fly. Naruko had expected this though. Without words, the girl gave her clones an instruction to get Iruka to safety. The 4 copies obeyed her without question and each grabbed one of his limbs. While they did this, Naruko quickly grabbed the other throwing star from the ground, holding it in front of her protectively. An annoying whiz and a loud clang later, the thrown shuriken bounced off of the other, spinning drunkenly through the air a few seconds before falling uselessly on the forest floor. The sheer force of the blow forced the blonde girl to stagger back and drop the weapon. Not one to wait patiently while his opponent recovered, Mizuki let out a war cry and charged. As he reached her, Naruko dodged the first hit, a fist aimed for her head, by ducking swiftly. But it didn't wave her from the second. An outstretched leg caught her squarely in the stomach and sent her flying. Arg. Meanwhile, hey, is this a good spot? Yeah, let's just drop him here. With a heavy thud, Yumino Iruka was dropped on the ground, some distance away of the brawl that had broken out between Naruko and Mizuki. Hey, don't drop him like that. Yeah, you could break his neck or something. Shut up. With a forceful shout, one of the 4 clones had prevented what could have become an all-out catfight. We need to get back. Quote. Grinning foxily, another one of the copies spoke up and rubbed her hands gleefully. Let's get that bastard. The clone that had diffused a possibly volatile situation motion for the other 3 clones to come closer. Okay, this is what we do. Naruko was getting seriously tired. Her back still aching from the impact with that tree, and her legs and arms sore from blocking whatever punches and kicks she could she was doubting she could keep this up for much longer. Currently, she was huddled behind a reasonably sized tree trunk, waiting for yet another deadly barrage of sharpened metal to stop. Damn, where do you get them all? Do you pull them out of your ass? Naruko shouted, attempting in her own way to stall for more time to recover. Shut up, you damn brat, came the furious reply. Lesson 1 in direct combat, Anko style. Annoy your opponents so they will get angry enough to make mistakes. Well, and it is just really fun to do. Don't call me a brat, you pretty boy pansy. The girl shot right back, then smirked as she heard his enraged growl. I'm going to cut out your intestines and strangle you with them, little girl. Ha, I'd like to see a wuss like you try. Stop hiding and I will. Mizuki taunted, then suddenly, sounded quite surprised. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Let me go. Loud exclamations of victory followed. Take that, one voice exclaimed, and that, another voice hollered, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of a mouth biting down of something. Naruko got up from her hiding place and met an unbelievable sight. 4 exact copies of the exuberant girl clamped down on his limbs, effectively pinning him to one place. Mizuki looked fearfully at the original girl, wondering what she might do with him. If her past pranks were any indication, he was in a deep pile of shit. Let me go, you useless demon spawn. He struggled fruitlessly against his bonds, only serving to shake his captors wildly. Hurry up, boss lady. The clone that held down his left leg yelled loudly. You know what to do. The other on his right leg added. The other 2 muffled their support, their mouths filled with Mizuki's wrists. Hesitating only for a split second, Naruko quickly grinned impossibly wide at the man struggling and ran towards him, arm pulling back like a cannon waiting to fire. I already knew about Kyuubi, she roared as the distance between the two was eaten up quickly by her amazing speed. Nei-chan would never keep a secret from me. At the last minute, she jumped forwards, her leg jerked back. And she kicked him right in the family jewels. Some distance away, a certain scarred Chunin awoke just in time to witness the spectacle. Iruka sucked in his breath as his eyes widened considerably. The sight of Naruko taking her revenge on Mizuki was so ludicrous and utterly bizarre, he didn't know whether to laugh or to cringe in pity for his treacherous colleague. Of all the things the small girl could have done, this was certainly the epitome of her mean streak as far as he was concerned. Still, it wasn't as if he could blame her. After all, the bastard had hurt him pretty bad. I wish I was the one who did that. His eyes widened once more as those words left his bloodied lips. He had never felt that way before. Maybe Naruko and her rather fetching sister were rubbing off on him. Now there was a scary thought. Wiping his mouth with the back of his hands, he refocused on Mizuki again, just as the pain finally reached his brain. Oh! The Chunin moaned pitifully. His hands clutching his groin after the clones disappeared in a cloud of smoke, their duties performed to satisfaction while his eyes rolled up into his head. Ha ha! Take that, you bastard! Towering victoriously, and showing absolutely no mercy, was Mitarashi Naruko. She pointed at the man, a definite sign of warning. Don't mess with me or Iruka-sensei again, I'll hurt you even more. Hearing this, Iruka shook his head slowly, a lopsided smile tugging at his lips. He wasn't sure if she was able to make Mizuki suffer more than she already had. Almost as if on cue, a peal of exuberant laughter followed the girl's bold statement. Next, craning to focus on the source of the commotion, and ignoring Mizuki, who had dropped on his knees and slumped forwards until his face hit the dirt, by this time with a small trail of drool escaping the corner of his mouth, teacher and student tried to find out who was obviously spying on them. I can't believe you kicked him there. Anko laughed, slapping her knee as she doubled over. Folding her arms in front of her chest, Naruko nodded smugly. He had it coming. Ha, he sure did. By now, the older woman was wiping away tears of mirth from the corners of her eyes as she surveyed the traitor lying on the ground, twitching every now and again. If he knew what was good for him, he would surely not try and move while she was present. Anko-san, Naruko, Iruka called out hesitantly, applying the last bandages of the emergency medical kit Anko had brought with her and given to him after she had revealed herself to the two. She had been watching the whole ordeal, and even though Iruka was slightly upset of her not intervening in any way whatsoever, he could still understand her need to see what her adopted younger sister was made of. As he closed the lid of the small box that had contained several rolls of bandages and stood up, he focused on the girl and woman standing near him. I think we should head back and report on the situation. Exchanging knowing glances, Anko and Naruko nodded to one another. Oi, Iruka-sensei, she shouted, moving closer towards him. Yes, he replied, somewhat hesitantly. Buy us ramen. Our ramen. Iruka stuttered. She wants ramen. At a time like this. Anko glowered at the child before grinning wickedly at the cornered teacher. You'll buy some dango for me, won't you? Iruka-kun. The slightly seductive whisper of the Junin was lost in a startled yelp however, when Naruko jumped on her back from behind. Ramen, she proclaimed imperiously. No way, Anko shouted back, swiping the girl from her back before placing her in a simple, yet supremely effective, headlock. He's going to buy dango. Iruka could only stand silently, stupefied at the display of the two ferocious females before him, defending their respective favorite foods. Ramen, 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 ram herk. Naruko choked, her jaws effectively stopped snapping futilely as she tried to bite Anko's arm in a desperate effort to alleviate the pressure. Quote, Anko turned to Iruka, a smug look on her face as she continued to exert a fierce grip on her little sister's neck. Dango. Right, Iruka-kun. Anko-san. The kind-hearted Chunin pointed at Naruko's face feebly, which rapidly became more and more purple by the second. The woman responded sweetly, apparently unaffected by the little girl's struggling, though said girl's struggling was quickly dying down. I think she can't breathe. Oh, Anko deadpanned, and dropped her like a sack of potatoes. Though instead of muttering curses of any kind, Naruko giggled. Iruka gulped. When Naruko giggled, it was rarely about a good thing. And how the girl was able to make such a sweet and simple expression of joy sound ever so menacing. He would never know. As she picked herself from the ground and motioned for Anko to lean down to whisper something in her ear, he muttered silent prayers to his ancestors. Especially when he saw the two females looking slyly at him, a feral grin mirrored by the wicked gleam in their eyes. Iruka-kun. Anko purred, making her way over to him, swaying her hips just the GHT amount and pushing out her chest for added effect. Already, Iruka could feel his defenses crumbling, as it took every effort on his part to not stare at the sensual woman's chest, or other curvatures for that matter. Iruka-kun. Anko repeated. Why don't you buy ramen and dango for us? The faint feeling of something dribbling down his upper lip went unnoticed by Iruka. In fact, a battle of sorts was taking place inside of him. On the one hand, the logical part of his mind was begging and screaming for him to run away now, as it already sensed the impending doom of the content of his wallet. The passionate side, however, betrayed its mental sibling and sided with the rumbling and rapid thumping of his heart, clamoring for him to accept her gracious offer. Sure, was the eventual croak, followed immediately by a mental whoop. Anko grinned broadly and shot Naruko a wink over her shoulder. Mission success, she mouthed, then focused her attention on Iruka again. She grabbed his right arm and spun him around in the direction of her favorite dango establishment. Naruko followed suit, though pausing only for a minute to kick Mizuki once more for good measure. Moments later, several figures jumped from the crowns of the trees surrounding the small clearing. All of them wore dark cloaks, specifically designed to hide their body. Though the thing that stood out were the different masks each of them wore, depicting an animal of some kind. One of them, large, burly and obviously male, despite being hidden by a mask and cloak, spoke up in a rumbling voice. Poor bastard. Another, with a mask shaped like the face of a hawk, knelt next to the barely conscious teacher, who was still clutching his manhood as if his life depended on it. He is a traitor. He will suffer a worse fate than this. Enough. A third member interjected, pushing past the fourth who stood impassively a few feet away from Mizuki. Our mission was to bring him back and the scroll. Edie went past the mission boundaries by letting that Mitarashi kid taking care of him. The figure removed its mask, revealing a startlingly beautiful woman, and grabbed the front of Mizuki's vest, hoisting him up slightly. Despite the pain he was in his bare consciousness, Mizuki felt terror welling from deep inside of him as the woman's lavender orbs peered coldly into his own. I think Rhino Ibiki-san will want to have a word with you, traitor. Naruko snuck through the darkness of her house. It was still very early, maybe 5 in the morning, she wasn't sure. Carefully she made her way through the hallway, stepping over the mess that littered the floor. The events of the previous evening were still clear in her mind. After possibly turning Mizuki impotent, they had unwound by mooching off of her teacher. Though these two things were undoubtedly good for Naruko, she still remained saddened. She went through all the trouble of stealing the top-secret scroll, incapacitated T. He Hokage himself, though she didn't really think that old man was much of a shinobi to begin with, and taught herself a forbidden ninjutsu, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. On top of all that, she beat a Chunin. But then again, Naruko really didn't know how Mizuki was ever able to become one. He was such a wimp. She thought disbelievingly. Closer and closer she crept towards the door of her older sister. She was being childish, she knew that, and there was a good chance that she would be yelled at. But still, as silently as she could, she opened the door, with its distinctive dumpling-shaped nameplate, and stepped inside. Like the rest of the house, Anko's room was no exception to the unwritten rule about the requisitioned border between messiness and near-tidiness. Both of them enjoyed the cozy feel of a slightly chaotic household, and keeping everything neat in order just wouldn't do. Just like them. After a brief glance about the room, Naruko spotted her target, a large bed Anko wouldn't make do with a one-person bed. She insisted on having enough room and its single occupant slumbering peacefully. With her features straining in concentration, the girl tiptoed over to the EDGE of the bed and slid underneath the blanket. If Pinky or Matchstick would find out about this, I'd never live this down. Naruko grumbled, and crawled over the thick and bouncy mattress. After a few moments of navigating in the darkness underneath the blanket, she noticed a familiar warmth and settled comfortably herself next to it. Naruko-chan. Damn. The 12-year-old winced as she heard the sleepy murmuring above her. She could have expected it though. Anko was a Junin after all, a special Junin at that. Yeah. She sighed and poked her head from under the covers. Anko, still somewhat asleep, smacked her lips and tilted her head slightly downwards, eyes still closed. What's wrong? She muttered sleepily. Nothing, I guess. It was painfully obvious that the older woman didn't believe her. But she let it slide. Come here. She yawned and wrapped an arm around Naruko's shoulders. A little surprised, but happy nonetheless, the girl scooted closer to her sister and closed her eyes. She would deal with the consequences of the previous evening a little bit later. Dear Imoto-chan, I had to leave a little early, another one of those crappy meetings. They are so boring. I think I'll burn off Iwashi's goatee just to liven things up again. He finally got one again after I burned off his last one too. I'll be back late in the afternoon, evening if Ebisu Bakaji. ETS the chance to do one of his stupid long lectures again. There's some food in the fridge, make yourself some, okay. When I get back though, we'll have to have a little talk. CYA. Anko. P.S. Touch my dango again, and your head is mine. Naruko let out a shuddering sigh, slumping over slightly from her seating position, with a thick blanket covering her outstretched legs. She had reread this note 4 times already. It was a good thing that there was no mention of the fact that she had technically stolen one of the village's most prized possessions. And she wasn't carted off towards the prison after her fight with Mizuki. But the girl dreaded the talk she was going to have with her older sister. What was she going to say? That she failed the exam for the 4th time in a row. That once again, Mitarashi Naruko, prankster extraordinaire, had failed her academic responsibilities abysmally. She had felt so uncharacteristically depressed, that she hadn't even left the bed yet. And as he glanced at the bedside alarm clock, it was already 2:30. Get a hold of yourself, useless girl. Yeah, that's right, Naruko agreed with that small voice in the back of her head. I am useless. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. Hands balled up into fists and blue eyes narrowed as she became angry and quite defensive all of a sudden. You're weak. I'm not. Prove it. Now that left Naruko without any response. She wanted to prove that voice wrong. She wasn't weak anymore. She had beaten up a Chunin after all. That certainly had to count for something. Snorting, the girl threw back the blanket and jumped from Anko's large bed. I'm not weak, she said aloud and stormed out of her sister's room. Oi, Naruko-chan. Anko's voice drifted through their house, but elicited no response. Slightly disgruntled, the dark-haired woman searched the house, opening every single door, only to be greeted by empty rooms, devoid of Naruko's presence. Where are you? She tried again, closing the door to the girl's bedroom and walking down the hall. She moved towards the living room, her sandaled feet sliding lazily of the tatami mats. Where is she? She repeated, more for her own benefit than anyone else. Only then did she notice the faint sounds coming from outside, in what some could consider the front yard. Their house was situated in the forest, which made their yard rather large. Maybe I should consider going through the front door sometime. Anko pondered this and got steadily closer to the source of the sounds. Expertly weaving through the cluttered furniture of their living room, then reaching the small hallway that led to the front door, she stopped to listen. Someone was shouting, and was that the clatter of metal hitting metal? A smile appeared on the Junin's face as she scanned the tree line. Darting through the leaf-cluttered crowns and stout branches littered with knotholes was a blonde figure. No, make at 2 figures, and one of those figures was definitely throwing a deadly hail of shuriken and kunai at the other. Meanwhile, as Anko observed the fight, if you could call it that, Naruko was having the time of her life. That is, until a kunai grazed her cheek for the umpteenth time. Hey, watch it, she shouted towards a perfect replica of herself. Apparently, the bunshin she was able to produce were dispelled with a single hit. Therefore, she decided on this little game. She had created only one corporeal clone after many tries since her chakra control was still nowhere near perfect and instructed it to chase her and try to stop her. Hey, it's not my fault that my aim is so crappy. The clone shot back, scowling. Naruko had to grit her teeth to ignore the obvious insult towards her abilities. Aside from taking on the appearance of herself, the girl's attitude also seemed to be copied. Yeah, whatever, let's go. The clone smirked and let loose another barrage. A poof of smoke. Later and every single of the kunai and shuriken clattered uselessly on the tree branch before dropping down to the ground below. Your ever beautiful and super cute sister is here. Ha, the clone. Gaped stupidly and the real Naruko felt a veritable question mark appear over her head. Nei-chan, what are you doing? What? I'm not allowed to join in the fun. Anko asked, raising a single eyebrow. That was all the girl was able to utter before jumping to the side, avoiding the Junin's fist which had been aimed for where her head had been a moment ago. Come on, let's spar for a bit. Attention shattered. The single clone disappeared in a cloud of smoke. There was one unwritten rule when in a fight with Anko. At least for Naruko there was. Dodge like your life depends on it, because most of the time. It really is. Anko tended to go a little overboard when fighting, and more often than not, Naruko had been limping to the academy the next day because of it. Smirking, her older sister gave her a bit of advice. Come on now, don't hold back, I'll hurt you for real. She's serious, Naruko thought, barely deflecting a punch with the flat of her hands, and as then kneed in the gut which sent her in a wild freefall. With a mighty grunt, the girl crashed in the mossy forest floor. She did not have time to consider her impact though, for immediately the aim knee that had sent her flying came at her once more. She rolled to the side quickly, and flipped on her feet, narrowly dodging the knee and the sweeping kick that followed. Don't just dodge, attack me. Anko told her calmly, not sounded the least bit strained. I thought you learned some fancy new jutsu. As a response, Naruko growled and back-flipped out of the way of another punch that old have crushed her nose like an overripe grape. Anko didn't let up though and merely continued a stream of punches and kicks that would have made any normal person dizzy. When Naruko blocked a palm strike which was aimed at her sternum, the sheer force of the blow sent her skidding backwards. After she stopped some good 15 feet away, she finally had enough space to us her new move. Her hands slipped into the middle index cross seal. Watch this, she roared and gathered her chakra. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Immediately 10 clones appeared all around her, each and every one of them sporting the same lopsided smirk that framed her face. There we go. Anko shouted her approval and dashed forwards, her long trench coat flapping behind her. The clones tried to get away, but half them disappeared as quickly as they had come in a hail of rapid jabs due to Anko's own tremendous speed. Naruko had expected this however, and sent the rest after her older sister while she prepared another jutsu. She was counting on Anko to at least play with the rest of the clones for a bit. Watching the clones and Anko's skirmish out of the corner of her eyes, she distanced herself from them slightly. Hurriedly, she went through the series of seals required for the particular technique. As her fingers settled in the Ohitsuji Ram hand seal, she roared the name. Doden. Yamakuza no Jutsu. Earth Element. Landslide Technique. The earth seemed to move to those words, and a moment later, a wave of mud speckled with bits of moss appeared to engulf her target. The two clones not destroyed by Anko at this time continued fighting in an effort to keep the Junin rooted to the spot. But they were quickly hidden from view as the wave washed over them. Hearing the faint pops of the buncheons disappearing, Naruko let out a deep breath she didn't know she had been holding. The feeling of cool metal against the back of her neck quickly shattered that faint glimmer of relief. "Eep, you really thought I was going to be trapped that easily?" a voice said behind her, and ruffled her hair. "Nei-chan." She whined grumpily and immediately moved to straighten her spikes, for as far as she was able to anyway. Rich and rolling laughter followed, and the pressure of the sharp edge on her neck disappeared. "I was good though, wasn't I?" Naruko asked hopefully. I guess so." Anko put the kunai she had been holding back in its holster and folded her arms in front of her chest. Pouting, Naruko turned on her heels and glared at her as best as she could. "HMMPH. Ah, did Anko step on your little ego?" The dark-haired woman truly enjoyed pushing Naruko's buttons, and mocking the kid in a childish tone was one of her favorite ways. The girl stomped towards her. "Grr, hee." Turning away from Naruko, the dark-haired woman moved to one of the many trees and plunked down in front of it, patting the ground beside her with a free hand. "Come here, we need to talk, remember? All mock anger forgotten." The girl gulped. "Damn, I was hoping she would forget." Hesitantly, Naruko obeyed, and sat beside her sister. Anko raised a single eyebrow at her odd behavior, and it threatened to disappear into her hairline completely when the girl lifted her knees to her chest and hugged them tightly with her arms. "Oi, what are you being so depressed about? You kicked that pansy's ass, didn't you?" she asked her bluntly. After a moment's pause, Naruko responded, her eyes drifting downwards. "Yeah, I guess, but..." When nothing else seemed forthcoming, Anko prodded her in her side. "But what? I failed the exam again," came the quiet reply, and Naruko's face disappeared between her knees. "Ooh, that." The even response made her look up again, and saw her older sister grinning like the maniac she was. "I'm guessing you don't deserve this then, huh?" she said, waving a rectangular box around. Naruko's eyes grew wide like dinner plates. "Is that for me? Hole in one, short stuff," Anko affirmed and patted the girl's head before giving it to her. This certainly didn't happen often. It wasn't Anko's style to give something to her after she had failed anything. Instead, she'd just say that she would have to try harder next time. Surprise and elatedness quickly turned into suspicion. Scrutinizing the object in her hands, and giving the woman next to her a sideways glance, she carefully shook the box. Gifts after failing were far and few between, but pranks weren't. As far as she could feel, Naruko didn't sense any tension on the packaging that might give away a spring-loaded or tightly wound trap. She sniffed the box. "Nope, no odd sense either. I didn't do anything with it," Anko murmured, feigning insult. "Honest," she added after Naruko's disbelieving stare directed her way. Still not trusting her sister completely, the girl opened the lid of box ever so carefully. Then dropped it as she saw the faint glimmer of metal. Of all the things, Naruko knew she had done something bad, but to stick what could be an assortment of deadly weaponry inside that harmless-looking box. Letting out an exasperated sigh, Anko picked up the box, ripped out its contents and thrust it into Naruko's hands. "Geez, you dolt, it's not like I was planning to kill you." But all that was lost on the girl, however, as she saw what it was exactly. Her mouth opened and closed on its own accord as she tried to formulate proper words. "You like it?" Anko grinned and nudged her with her elbow, nearly sending the girl sprawling to the ground. How? I had a talk with Iruka-kun. Wrapping an arm around her shoulder, Anko explained. He didn't any convincing. We both figured that Kage Bunshin could be counted as a normal Bunshin for your exam results. Trembling, Naruko held up what was revealed as a plate of metal fastened to a pale gray length of cloth. But on the metal was engraved the symbol of the village she loved so much. Konoha's swirling leaf. I put the plate on some new cloth, I hope you don't mind. Naruko shook her head fiercely. No, Anko wanted to tell her more. About what had happened during the meeting. And about the changes that were soon to come. But as the girl suddenly latched onto her, sobbing her gratitude in the crook of her neck, she decided it could wait until later. Moving her hand to stroke Naruko's spiky golden hair fondly, Anko whispered her congratulations. You did very well, Naru-chan. Just like Mitarashi Naruko the evening before, Hyuga Hinata was in tears, though for a whole other reason. Worried about the sudden disappearance of her friend, she had asked several people about where the blonde girl had gone. To her surprise, all of the people she asked grinned at her and told her Naruko had failed. Yet again, that had brought tears to Hinata's eyes, for the Hyuga heiress had one major failing. Her self-esteem. While most of the members of the Hyuga clan strew TTED around Konohagakure like they were Hokage themselves, Hinata did not. Something that her father did not shy away from to point out. Case in point, a recent spar with her younger sister, which she lost. Rather horrendously so. The burning glare her father had sent her made her cringe every time she thought about it. Hinata's younger sister, Hanabi, did not glare at her, instead, she just didn't figure out why her older sister was so weak, which she asked about rather bluntly, too. Sighing, the blue-haired girl tried to disappear inside her oversized coat as she made her way around a sharp bend towards the academy. There was nothing she wanted more than to be able to disappear without a trace. A hyperactive, bubbling mass of exuberant energy quickly squashed that idea though. Hinata, jumping up and down, trying her best to defy gravity, none other than Naruko was flapping her arms madly in a desperate attempt to catch the shy girl's attention. Naruko-chan, Hinata whispered in surprise, barely catching herself as she nearly stumbled. Oi, Hinata, get over here. A crimson flush made its way to her pale cheeks. The crowd that had already gathered in front of the entrance of the academy had literally covered their ears in attempt to avoid going deaf. A baby no more than 1 year old, even began bawling while its mother tried to cover her ears and comfort her child at the same time. Naruko sure could be loud when she wanted to be. Wanting to avoid any further embarrassment, Hinata hurried towards the over-energized blonde. Hey, you sure took your sweet time, didn't you? Was the greeting that awaited her. Aquamarine eyes trailed upwards and took in a dazzling grin, then went down again, just a tiny bit. Gasping, Hinata pointed shakily towards a genuine Konoha Hittite tied loosely around Naruko's neck. Why you passed? Pouting, Naruko nodded. What, you thought I couldn't make it? And no. Biting her lip, the other girl tried to extract herself out of the hole she had dug for herself. I asked as several people yesterday and they told me you failed the exam. The last part trailed off in a near inaudible whisper and Naruko had to strain herself to hear it. Thumping herself on her chest, the blonde girl grinned broadly once more. Like I'm going to be stopped by a simple exam. A brief glance revealed to her that the crowd had already dispersed. Be it parents dropping off their children or the children going inside to their respective classrooms, and she threw an arm around Hinata's shoulders. Come on, we'd better be going. I don't want to be late for the assigning of the teams. And wait till I tell you about this new technique I learned. It's awesome. Team 7, Uchiha Sasuke. Haruno Sakura. Hell yeah, take that, Ino Pig. And Inuzuka Kiba. No. A series of whining barks followed that last complaint. Standing upright, pointing a somewhat clawed finger at whom Naruko sometimes affectionately called emo retarded nitwit, was Inuzuka Kiba, glaring with his cat-like eyes. Why the hell am I being forced on a team with that Uchiha bastard and his pink slave girl? Coughing politely, Iruka gave the Fang boy a smile. The purpose of today is to arrange balanced teams. Sasuke and Sakura were at the top of the class in academic results, while you on the other hand were almost at the bottom as far as results go. Blushing in embarrassment, Kiba couldn't think of anything to say to dispute that comment, not that he could either way, and sat back down on his bench. Akamaru, hidden in the folds of his fur-lined, dark gray jacket, gave his master a comforting lick on the chin and whined pitifully. Now then, the scarred Chunin continued. Team 8. Aburame Shino, Yamanaka Ino and Akamichi Choji. The response of these new team members was rather mixed. There was Aburame Shino, stoic as always, who didn't say a word, content with only nodding at his fellows. Ino was still in a heated glaring match that had started after Sakura's energetic proclamation of her victory over her blonde rival. The last member sent a friendly wave directed at Shino, L the while stuffing his face with an impossible amount of snacks he produced from seemingly out of nowhere. Choji did, however, throw worried glances every so often at a dark-haired boy seated next to him. But judging from the boy's casual demeanor, he either didn't seem to care, or was fast asleep. It was hard to tell which of the two was the case. A few benches in front, someone else was having a similar problem. Seated next to Hinata was a listless Naruko. Her excitement had long died down since their teacher had begun his lecture. Even faking to pay attention to Naruko wasn't working. Instead of her eyes glazing over like they normally did during long lectures, her eyelids inched downwards until finally they had closed and a gentle snore drifted through the crowded classroom. Hinata did her best not to giggle. Only when her name was called out, did she snap out of it. Team 10. Hyuga Hinata, Nara Shikamaru, and there was a lengthy pause here, and any murmuring died down too. Hushed whispers as the children saw their teacher's intent gaze focused on one spot. Mitarashi Naruko. Chin slipping of her palm, Naruko had jerked awake. Completely clueless, she stared at Haruka. Before she had the chance to ask any questions though, she felt a tug on the sleeve of her jacket. All shyness forgotten, Hinata practically beamed at her friend. But as she was about to open her mouth to inform her of what she had undoubtedly missed, a certain someone made his presence known rather vocally. "Sensei, you can't be serious." Shikamaru shouted in indignation, his lazy attitude completely forgotten. "You can't put me with those two girls." Haruka barely held back a smile. "I'm sorry, Shikamaru, but that's just the way it is. Now you and your teammates wait here. Your Junin instructor will be here shortly." Naruko gave the boy a blank look, before directing her attention elsewhere. "Well, I guess he's not too bad. At least he's not one of those bass bishies." Naruko jerked her thumb in his general direction, all the while staring pointedly at a certain raven-haired Uchiha. "Did she?" Shikamaru stared at her disbelievingly. "Just call me ugly. Everyone, you are allowed to take a 15-minute break. After that, please wait in the classroom until your assigned Junin instructor comes to fetch you and your teammates." Haruka straightened a pile of papers on his desk, and smiled at the arrayed assortment of fledgling shinobi fondly. "It was an honor to be your teacher, make me proud. Man, I can't believe I'm not going to see Haruka-sensei anymore." Naruko whined as she shoveled the last remnants of another cup of instant ramen into her mouth. Scoffing, Shikamaru dragged himself up to his feet, and chose not to reply. Hinata poked her index fingers together nervously. "I'm sure you'll see him again, Naruko-chan." The brand new Team 10 had decided to take their lunches outside to enjoy them under the cheery sun and a clear blue sky. Though Shikamaru was still opposed to having two girls on his team, he knew there was no use complaining. Little did he know that things were about to become a lot worse. To be continued, and thank you for watching.